It all begins when Luke comes of age and, as is the custom, he's destined to receive a gift from the gods. On the day of the ceremony, his father tells him how excited he and the people are to see what he gets. As the son of a lord, Luke is expected to receive a gift of combat since his parents were gifted with swordsmanship, and his father is known across the land for his gallant acts in battle, which took him from being Viscount to Marquis in a single generation. So after Luke's father says he's counting on Luke, they arrive at the venue and Luke stands before the priest with Rael, his half-brother. While the people whispered about Luke's better chance, being a legitimate son compared to Rael, the priest silenced them and announced that Luke's gift was village building. Shocked by this, Luke asks what kind of gift it is, but the priest says he has no idea. When he adds that it's a useless gift in combat, the people worry about their future. Suddenly, Rael shoves Luke aside and steps forward to hear his fate. While the people whisper their expectations of the worst, the priest announces that Rael's gift is holy swordsmanship. Hearing this, the people cheer, and Luke's father congratulates Rael while Luke glances at his mother and senses her disappointment. Some moments later, Luke prepares to head out and realizes nobody's coming to see him off since they only attended to him because they thought he was next after his father. However, when the reality hits him, he realizes it's a cold world as he heads to the north, the uninhabited wilderness of his family's domain. He had been tasked with developing a barren land that had been neglected due to its poor soil. Rael wasted no time wielding his power by exiling Luke to put his lame gift to use in the harsh wilds, and wasn't opposed by anyone. So, despite his training, Luke lacks the balls to take any life, making him the glitch in a lineage of warriors. After a week of traveling, the carriage driver announces that they've arrived, and on stepping out, Luke realizes the place is worse than he'd heard. On checking out the land, he realizes there's a vast forest and a huge mountain range, which seem like danger zones, inhabited by creatures from Stranger Things. Just when he wonders how he's supposed to deal with all of that alone, Milia, his maid, steps out and encourages him. However, when she points out that he's not as glum as she expected, Luke says it's no use. As the carriage heads off, Luke asks Milia if she really wants to stay, and in response, she says she swore an oath to serve him till the end. Impressed, Luke smiles, feeling good to know someone cares, while Milia drools, thinking of her weird attraction to the dude. Just then, Milia tells Luke that he could either try to make something out of the barren land or run away with her to start a new life in a new city. Hearing this, Luke thinks about Milia's options and figures he's yet to use his village-building gift, so he decides to try it out first. Suddenly, he opens up his skill menu and gets asked if he wants to build his village at the location. While he thinks about this, Milia gets in his face, so he tells her to back off a little. Milia then freaks out, making Luke realize she couldn't see the pop-up. After this, Luke figures the letters used are from a different world, but they were familiar to him since he has memories of a past he had in a different world. Although he doesn't remember what kind of person he was, he still recalls the knowledge and customs of that world. After this, Luke chooses to build his village, and suddenly, the land around them levels out. Surprised, Luke checks out his village stats and realizes he's got points and could build facilities with them. Since they need somewhere to sleep, he chooses to build a hut, and out of nowhere, a hut appears, surprising Milia. When Luke asks Milia if he should build another hut or a well, she suggests he build the well since they can't live for days without water. However, in her mind, she's excited about the idea of cuddling up with Luke in a hut. Suddenly, Luke creates a well unlike any she's ever seen, and when Milia proves she's got the IQ of a caveman, Luke shows her how the well works. On checking what's left of his points, Luke says he could create one more thing, and Milia suggests he create a field. At that moment, Luke gets another pop-up, asking if he'd like to turn Milia into a villager, so he informs Milia about it, and she tells him to do whatever he wants with her. When he does this, he earns more points, so he states that he has no plans to add more villagers, and Milia hugs him, thinking they'll live happily ever after later that night. While they lay together, Luke thinks about his gift and figures he likes it better since he hates wars. In that moment, he decides to build his own village in a barren land using his mysterious gift. Just then, he feels the sheets rustling around him as Milia moves closer to him and sniffs him while feeling like she's in heaven. The next morning, while Milia squeezes the life out of Luke, he figures he has to make another hut. When Milia rises, she states that it's a maid's duty to wake up before their master, but Luke tells her she's not a maid anymore. Despite this, Milia insists she must do her best to support the village head as a villager. Just then, she flashes back to the day she arrived at Luke's castle as a maid. As the daughter of a low-ranking noble family, she could either marry into another low-ranking family or become a maid for a high-ranking noble. So Milia chose to become a maid, and one day, since she sucks at the job, a dish slipped out of her hand and broke. Horrified by this, she froze, and Isabella, Luke's mother, showed up asking if she had broken the dinnerware. When Milia apologizes, Luke suddenly apologizes to his mother and takes the blame for the broken dish. Surprised by this, Milia wonders why he did that, while Isabella tells her to be more careful with Luke. When Isabella leaves, Luke turns to Milia and says he knew Isabella wouldn't get mad if she thought he did it. Ever since then, the little dude has stolen Milia's heart. Meanwhile, in Bajrata's domain, a neighboring town to Luke's home, Selin informs her father that she's leaving home. Surprised, her father asks if she's in her right senses, and Selin says she won't let him force her into a marriage for political convenience. In addition to this, Selin says she could deal with Luke being her husband-to-be, but can't stand a twisted idiot like Raol. When her father tries to convince her to look at the big picture, Selin says she'd rather die and dashes out of the house. Just then, some makeshift guards try to stop her, but she gives them a deathly stare and tells them to move aside if they don't want to end up in a world of hurt. Back in the barren lands, Luke announces that he has gotten more points and can make a field. Hearing this, Milia points out that field work is hectic, but Luke says he wants to try to do what he can with his own hands since it's his village. While she watches Luke work, Milia gets weak in her knees and literally falls for him. Later, after the day's work, Luke takes a bath outdoors and hears some weird sounds from nearby bushes. While he thinks of building some defense structures, Milia secretly rubs one off while enjoying the view. The next day, Luke builds a watchtower, and in the subsequent days, he makes a plaster wall from earth. A few days later, he and Milia notice their little field sprouting and celebrate the growth of their new food source. Suddenly, they hear a weird sound, and while Luke wonders if it's a beast, Milia rushes up the tower to take a look. However, when she realizes her goodies must be on full display, her mind runs into a frenzy over this. Luke, who was busy looking for monsters, asks if she sees anything, and when she realizes he's not watching her, she announces that a group of goblins is approaching them. After this, Milia announces that the goblins are using each other as stepping stones to get over the wall. So Luke tells her to stay on the tower while he puts his swordsmanship training to good use. Out of nowhere, a goblin tries to attack Luke but gets shown the nasty end of his sword. Charged by this, Luke slashes open a few more goblins and starts feeling like Kratos. Unknown to him, the last goblin charges at him, but its head gets blown open, shocking Luke. Just then, Selin shows up on the wall and tells Luke that it's been a while. As the daughter of a count, Selin was granted the ability to fight with 2 blades and use water and ice magic. Surprised to see her, Luke asks why she's shown up, and Selin points out that he's gotten bigger since the last time they met. When Luke responds by asking again why she showed up, Selin reveals that she ran away from home after cutting ties with her family for being engaged to Raol. When she adds that she'd rather die than be married, Luke trepidates, thinking he dodged a bullet. So he apologizes for not noticing it earlier and says it must be hard for girls to have their marriages decided for them. However, Selin says that Raol is a walking red flag, and just when she's about to confess her feelings, Milia suddenly gets in between them and tells them to refrain from having private talks. When Selin asks who she is, Amelia says she's the first villager and introduces Luke as the village head. Curious, Selin says she was worried when she heard he was sent to develop the land, and asks if they built the structures by themselves. In response, Luke decides to show off his abilities, so he opens up his menu and chooses to build a storehouse. Immediately, a storehouse lands before them, making Selin stare in disbelief. When Luke explains that he could make most of what they need, Selin says she's never heard anything like it and adds that they couldn't have built all that in such a short time. Just then, Luke gets a pop-up, asking if he'd like to make Selin a villager. However, since he thinks she's too good to live in a place like that, he swipes it off and tells Selen that his family won't stay quiet about the broken engagement. Compared to Luke's family, Selen's family lacks military strength, so the marriage between the families benefits both families. Unbothered, Selen says that Luke's family won't waste their time getting angry at her family. However, Luke still thinks Selen must be valuable to her family for her combat skills, but Selen interrupts his thoughts by saying she's fine since she was supposed to marry him in the first place. When Selen adds that she could live in the village startup, Luke freezes and asks if she's sure about that. In response, Selen says she's got nowhere else to go, and automatically, Luke gets a pop-up again, notifying him that Selen has become a villager. On realizing he's earned more points, Luke gets excited but points out that he can't provide her with the 5-star luxury lifestyle she deserves. Hearing this, Selen asks if her stay in the village will be an issue while in a menacing glare competition with Milia. Sensing this, Luke wonders why they're glaring at each other when it's their first time meeting. After this, Milia explains that since they lacked beds and showers, it'd be hard for a trust fund kid in the village. Unfazed, Selen says it's the norm on the battlefield and adds that they'll need her to fight off monsters. As the first villager, Milia then informs Selen that her status doesn't apply in the village, amusing Selen, who then asks if she's trying to dominate her. Just then, Milia says she feels sorry for Selen, judging from their malnourished saucers, annoying Selen, who then claims she's a B-cup at least. While she tries to defend her mid-assets by claiming she's still growing, Milia says she was 3 times bigger when she was Selen's age. As they argue, Luke decides he's too young for girl drama and leaves them to it. Later at night, while Milia and Luke prepare for bed, Selen enters and freaks out about how tiny the hut space is. Milia then asks if she's got a problem with that and pushes her out, while adding that they won't force her to stay. Just then, Luke gets an idea and suggests that he sleep in the storehouse. However, the ladies get physical with each other, and Selen says it's Milia who deserves to sleep in the storehouse. On hearing this, Milia asks Selen if she's trying to get down with Luke, but she accuses Milia of projecting her nasty desires on her. When Luke announces that he's leaving for the storehouse, both ladies exclaim. However, he ended up getting sandwiched between the ladies. While the ladies squeeze into him from both sides, Luke realizes he won't be getting any sleep that night. Some time ago, when Selen visited Luke's home for the first time, the father had informed her to be ladylike in front of him since he would likely be her husband someday. After this, she tells her to wait while he leaves to get something ready. Since she had no idea what was going on, she decided to take a stroll, and on her way, a rock landed on her path. Curious, she decides to check out where it came from and spots Raoul playing with rocks. When she wonders if he's Luke, she realizes there's some other boy tied to a tree who Raoul was using as target practice. Suddenly, she dashes out, asking what he's doing. In response, Raoul says he's just having some fun, so Selen tries to stop him while saying the boy could die if he gets hit in a bad spot. But Raoul shut her up and said that he could always get someone else to play with. When Raoul threw the stone at the boy, Luke suddenly got in the way and got hit instead. Worried, Selen asked Luke if he was okay, and he said he was fine while Raoul panicked and fled the scene. Afterward, she found out that Raoul is the violent one and was relieved to know her future husband isn't a brute. Some years later, when they met again, Selen asked Luke if he had told his father about Raoul's brutality, but he said Raoul's poor reputation would only get worse if he did that. When he chipped in that he's still his brother and people will say awful things about him, Selen gets excited to know he's that kind. Back in the village, Luke saves up some village points and celebrates his little win. So he decides to build a small house since he's been enduring the torture of sleeping between the raging beasts. Having had enough, he opens up his menu and makes the house drop. Not long after this, he and the ladies inspect the house and realize it has some furniture. Since they've never seen anything like it, Selen asks if the kitchen is a place to cook, and Luke confirms this. After he spends the next few minutes explaining how the kitchen items work, Milia beams with excitement while Selen wonders what's going on. After this, Luke shows them the bathroom and explains how they can conduct their business there. Curious, Selen asks where their poop goes after flushing since she's used to servants collecting it. Luke then says there must be some great power making it work. when Selin points out that they are never using the well again and gets excited. For no reason, the ladies get in each other's throats again, so Luke adds that they can now sleep separately since there are 2 rooms, shocking the ladies. Milia then says she can't share a room with Selin, and for the first time they see eye to eye. Just then, Luke realizes his suffering isn't ending anytime soon, so he decides they'll sleep together, but plans to take the floor while they take turns on the bed. However, at night, when he gets sandwiched between the ladies again, he asks why they have to sleep like that, and Milia says she can't have him sleeping on the floor. Eventually, they agreed to keep Luke squeezed in between them, making him realize his new condition is worse than it was at the hut. A month later, while Luke thinks of how long it's been since he started his village, Selin drops a boar and announces that she hunted it in the forest. Luke then asks if it's safe to go there, and she assures him that it is, as long as they don't go too deep into monster territory. Luke then checks out the boar, and Selin says she can preserve the meat using her magic. On spotting Milia nearby, Selin flaunts her achievement and annoys Milia, who then calls her a battle-crazed idiot who can't cook, let alone butcher meat. To prove herself, Selin gets to work slashing the meat like she's on a vendetta. Suddenly, she stops and asks the others if they can hear some voices. Immediately, Luke climbs the watchtower and spots a group of people outside the village. He then states that they don't pose any threats, since they are mostly women and children who look exhausted. In addition to this, Luke says that they might be refugees from a recent battle he heard about, and decides he can't ignore them. Some moments later, someone from the group says she has no idea a village was out in the wastelands, and Luke explains that it was founded recently. When he introduces himself as the village leader, Burlet, the group leader hides his surprise and introduces himself. Luke then spots the bony lines on his chest and figures they've been starved for long, so he offers them a drink from his well, and the people thank him. After this, Luke shows them how the well works, and they are wowed since they've never seen anything like it. While they take turns drinking, Luke creates another well, and when they see it, they wonder if it's been there before, but rush to get a drink regardless. Some moments later, Luke tells Milia to get the boar while Burlet narrates that they left their village after most of the men were drafted, and the older folk stayed back, insisting they'd only be an extra burden. Hearing this, Luke points out that the village doesn't have enough food since their crops aren't ready to be harvested yet. Just then, Milia arrives with the boar meat, and Luke tells the refugees to eat. Immediately, they jump on the offer, and Burlet breaks down in tears. Moved by this, Luke figures the people don't stand a chance in the wastelands, so he asks Burlet if they'd like to live in the village and adds that they need more people working the fields. Hearing this, Burlet says his group is mostly women and children who aren't a reliable source of labor. Although Luke realizes Burlet is right, he says that he and the ladies don't know enough to make it out in the wastelands and asks Burlet to help him. Hearing this, Burlet tearfully obliges and thanks Luke for the offer. Some moments later, Luke gets notified in a pop-up that he's added 51 more people to the village and levels up. Surrounded by screens, Luke realizes he's been shot up to level 3 and discovers he can now build more facilities. Afterwards, Luke realizes he gets more points when his village level goes up and also notices he got some new skills. On checking them out, he realizes he could move the facilities around and feels like he's in Sim City. Suddenly, Burlet spots the buildings moving and freaks out, thinking he's losing his mind. When he collapses, Luke catches him and explains that it's just his gift. Hearing this, some of the new villagers gather around him like he's Superman and ask about his gift. When Luke says it's village building, the kids couldn't hide their disappointment and said they'd prefer the gift of holy swordsmanship. While he leaves, Luke thinks of how he used to admire the gift too and decides to make houses for the new villagers. Suddenly, a row apartment drops with space enough for a family of 5. However, the villagers check out the toilet and wonder if they should drink from it. Luke then quickly explains what it is. After this, he figures out how many houses he has to build to accommodate everyone. When he finishes building, the villagers are impressed with his work, so Luke suggests they get some rest. After this, Luke decides to try out his assess villager skill, so he tries it out on Barlat, one of the new villagers, and gets a pop-up showing his personal information. However, when Luke tries to get rid of it to avoid invading his privacy, he realizes the guy has a gift, so he asks Barlat about his gift, but Barlat laughs it off, saying he has no gift since there's no church to give out blessings. Meanwhile, Luke wonders if that's the gift he'd get if he received a blessing. Later, when Luke tells Millia and Selen about his people-reading ability, Selen suggests he tries it out on her. So Luke tries it out and realizes that Selen has a high village loyalty and is best suited for a general. Curious, Selen asks what village loyalty means, and Luke explains that villagers with low loyalty are prone to committing crimes. So, Selen suggests they assess everyone since the village needs some manpower to keep it running. When Selen suggests that Millia get checked too, Millia fakes composure and asks if Luke can read minds with his skills. However, when Selen asks what she's hiding, Millia flees, saying Luke's too young to find out. Afterwards, Luke asks Burlet some questions about his personal information to check if his assessment is correct. Just then, Burlet introduces Barlat as his brother, and Luke figures it's the guy with the gift. Barlat then introduces his family to Luke and thanks him for all he's done. After playing 20 questions with everyone, Luke realizes how many villagers he's got, and also discovers there are a few others with potential gifts like Barlat. Later, when Selen asks him about his census, Luke reveals his discovery, surprising Selen, who then chips in that only the church or someone with an oracle can bestow gifts upon others. Hearing this, Luke realizes that there are more commoners with gifts than they've been made to believe and figures the nobles might be conspiring with the church to restrict blessings. Suddenly, Millia returns and empties a bucket of water on herself just to spill a wrong quote. When Luke asks if something's wrong, she says she's wiped her mind clean and rips open her balloons for him to inspect. However, Luke says there's no need to go that far and open his menu while wondering about what he'll find. Afterwards, Luke realizes that Millia's loyalty is ultimate and her recommended job is a priestess. On realizing that she has the gift of an oracle, they all freak out. Sometime later, Luke thinks about Millia's gift and recalls stories he's heard where people receive a gift after years of praying at a church. While he thinks of their lack of a church, Burlet notifies him that the vegetables are ready to be harvested. When they check it out, Burlet announces that he's never seen veggies grow that big and states that the soil must be top-notch. When they were done harvesting, Luke acknowledged everyone's help and suggested they throw a party to celebrate. A few moments later in the kitchen, Luke and Selen volunteer to help Millia with the cooking. But since she thinks Luke shouldn't be doing that, she stops him from cutting himself up and suggests he wash the veggies instead. Just then, Selen offers to carry out the slicing, but suddenly proves why warriors are useless at home. After a while, the meal was served, and the villagers showed up and complimented the appearance of the food. Luke then makes a toast to the harvest while the villagers get busy with the food. Impressed, the villagers comment on the quality of the veggies grown in the village and Luke's gift. Suddenly, some villagers rush in and announce that there's a group of people approaching the village. Immediately, Luke and some others get up the watchtower and realize there are about 40 people who look like refugees outside the walls. Suddenly, Burlet spots a familiar face and calls out to him. Shortly after, Burlet reunites with Donga, an old friend whose village often interacts with Burlet's. While the villagers reunite with familiar faces, Donga reveals that they fled their villages because they were helpless. When he commends Burlet for settling in the wastelands, Luke joins them, and Burlet introduces him as the village head who took them in some day before. Hearing this, Donga points out that he doesn't fit the profile, but when Luke introduces himself, Donga reciprocates. After this, Luke suggests they join the party and help themselves to some food, but when they hesitate, Luke insists. A few days later, the men were looking better and were harvesting crops when Luke visited the fields. Donga's group had decided to stay at the village too. So Luke checks out the new village stats and realizes they now have 97 villagers. He then creates more houses and fields to accommodate the people. Like Burlet's group, Donga's group was mostly women and children, but 4 of them had potential gifts. Just when Luke feels good about the village's growth, someone in the watchtower announces that another group, who might be refugees, is approaching the village. So Luke asks him how many there are, and the watchman announces that there are about 70 people, shocking Luke. Afterwards, Luke thinks about the number and realizes he wasn't scared when Burlet and his group came. However, now that they've got quite the number and more on the way, Luke figures it'd be too easy to welcome them with open arms, and he'd put everyone's life in jeopardy if he fails to take responsibility. When Burlet interrupts Luke's thoughts, Selin bluntly says the village has no room for more refugees and adds that taking them in would only end up badly for the village. After this, Selin tells Luke that there's a limit to how many people he can look after since not everyone will be as cooperative as the previous group. She then offers to go speak to the refugees, but when Luke tries to stop her, Donga and Burlet tell them to chill out and let them handle it. As they leave to get it sorted, Milia pats Luke on the shoulder and tells him to do what he thinks is right since she'll be there to back him up. Hearing this, Selin protests while Luke ponders it and figures Selin is right. However, he says he'll regret it later if he turns the people away and promises to do his best to make it work without causing trouble for anyone. When he asks them to back him up if things go south, his companions are surprised. So Donga and Burlet say it's no trouble since they've depended on him for so much, while Milia blushes from how cute he looks. Selin then tries to get her to be calm while Burlet assures Luke that there's enough food for everyone. Shortly after, Luke welcomes Leon and his caravan, who then become villagers. Because of this, the village levels up and Luke gains a new skill called Facility Upgrade. With the extra village space, Luke decides to move things around and make more facilities to accommodate the people. Since the village area doubled every time the village doubled, Luke wonders how big the village can get. Afterwards, he realizes that he could now build a church, so he considers the potential benefits of building a church and decides it's better to have one. Suddenly, a church appears, and as Luke approaches it to check it out, Milia shows up and asks if it's a church. As they opened the doors, Milia felt nostalgic, so she walked in, moving like she was looking for a signal. Luke then chips in that the church description said those of strong faith could receive a blessing. Upon hearing this, Milia figures it's her chance to help Luke out, so she says she'll pray from dusk till dawn to get her gift. Luke then tells her not to overdo it and takes his leave while Milia gets busy talking to the gods. Some moments later, Luke puts his new facility upgrade skill to use and improves a few facilities around the village. Some days later, Milia was still holed up in the church, so Luke checked on her, wondering if she was okay. Just then, he spots her praying and glowing differently. On spotting him, Milia spreads her arms and hugs him, claiming she got the oracle gift. On checking her personal information, Luke realizes she's right. So Milia thanks him for providing a church while Selin watches with disgust from the entrance. Seeing Milia try to smother Luke with her melons, Selin questions the choice of the gods. Some moments later, Luke meets with some villagers, and when they ask why they were summoned, he reveals that they all have the potential to receive a gift. Surprised, Barlat comments that he's from a long line of farmers since he thought only nobles could receive gifts. In response, Luke explains that although some families are more likely to receive gifts, their status doesn't really matter. In addition, he suggests they try giving them their gifts, and not long after this, Milia bestows upon Barlat the gift of swordsmanship. Suddenly, Barlat feels different and some ladies nearby suggest they make him a blade out of wood. However, Luke hands Barlat his sword, saying it'll be more useful in his hands. Barlat then says that the sword feels right, even though he has never held one before. After this, Barlat vows to grow strong enough to keep the village safe. Seeing this, the others get excited and ask to be next. Sometime later, while Barlat spars with some other villager, Burlet points out that the swordsmen are already at work, and Luke chips in that they're improving really fast. While he watches them spar, Luke understands why his father wanted him to receive the holy swordsmanship. Just then, Selin commends the improvement of the swordsmen and promises to take them along on her next hunting trip. Excited, the men call her teacher, surprising Luke, who then complains that he's the same age as Selin. Amused, Barlat explains that Selin has proved herself to be strong. Suddenly, Luke gets swarmed by some ladies who then try to convince him that it's cool being the village head. After treating him like a chihuahua, they announce that they're leaving to make lunch. At the time, the women in the village had become twice as many as the men since most of their husbands were forcibly conscripted. So Luke felt good to see the ladies smiling, but wished they'd regard him like Selin. Some moments later, the watchman informs Luke that they've got 10 more refugees approaching the village. When he checks them out, he notices they were bruised all over and wonders why they look terrified. So Luke asks what happened to them, and the refugees narrate that they were attacked by a gang of thieves but managed to escape. However, a few lost their lives while many others were dragged off somewhere. Hearing this, Selin insinuates that they might have brought trouble with them, so the refugees apologize, saying they were scared. When they confess that the thieves might have followed them, Luke exclaims meanwhile, Bar, a member of the gang of thieves, beats himself up for letting his guard down. His job was to abduct refugees and sell them to slave traders, but some of the goods ran away because he slipped up. While he's out searching for them, he arrives on a hill and is surprised to find a village down the hill. On looking closer, he realizes there are mostly women and children in the village, so he decides he'll take it down and get himself promoted. The gang of thieves was good at the job because they communicated through telepathy, so Bar notifies his gang that he has found the refugees. In the village, Luke gets a ping and points out that he has a weird feeling that something is wrong. When Selin asks him about it, Luke gets a pop-up, showing the presence of an intruder in the village and wonders if it's the gang of thieves. Selin then asks if there's anything else on the map, and Luke reveals that there's only one intruder who's probably scouting the village. Shortly after in the fields, Luke and Selin search for the intruder in silence while Barlat and a few others hide around to help. Just then, Selin points out that the intruder is concealing his presence and tells Luke to stand back since they don't know where he'll come from. Suddenly, Luke points to the exact spot where Bar is hiding, making him dash out, wondering how Luke found him. However, when he realizes they are young, he tries to attack them, but Selin freezes him up. Some minutes later, in a cell, Bar freaks out while his gang tries to communicate with him. But since he's being watched, he only listens to his gang announce that they're on their way. Just then, Selin points out that he's awake while Bar tries to figure out what's going on. After this, Selin points out that he's the thief who chased some refugees and interrogates him about his gang. However, Bar refuses to respond and informs his gang that taking the village would be a piece of cake. Suddenly, Nema, a granny in the village, shows up and suggests they leave the prisoner with her. Just then, Luke recalls that her recommended job was torturer and tells her not to get too close to him. On entering the cell, Nema tries to play some mind games on Bar, who then finds it hilarious that she's trying to make him cry. So he plays along and fakes some tears while begging. Suddenly, Nema sends him flying with a hit to his south pole. While Bar floats to heaven, Nema gives an evil look and assures Bar that he'll recall his mother's tears when she's done with him. While she gets to work on Bar, Nema tells Luke to go get ready for battle, and at the same time, the gang of thieves arrives near the village. On the hill, one of the thieves tries to communicate with Bar through telepathy but fails, so he informs his comrade that he couldn't get in touch with Bar. In response, the other guy points out that Bar has a track record for being useless. Annoyed, the boss stomps the ground and tells them to quit yapping. He then announces that all they need is brute force and no brains to make the refugees yield. Not long after this, the boss dashes off the cliff and smashes open the village gate. He then orders his men to follow him, and as they march into the village, they realize it's empty and wonder why the buildings look weird. Meanwhile, Luke picks water mode attack on his menu, and water suddenly splashes out of the grounds, shocking the thieves and flooding them out of the village. As they get ferried in the water, they suddenly notice it's freezing over, so they panic and scream, thinking they're going to die. After the water freezes and traps the thieves, Luke and his companions step out of hiding, and they commend Luke for the genius move. While Selin feels on top of the world for achieving something with Luke, the boss of the thieves suddenly shows up behind her and points out that she froze the water. Alarmed, Selin defends herself with her knives and tells the boss that he must have been strong to get out of the ice. Ignoring this, the boss tries to slash Selin, but she evades his attacks. After this, the boss realizes Selin left a mark on him while doing this, so the fight goes on while Burlet says that their strengths are equally matched. In response, Luke points out that the ice is melting because Selin is focused on the fight, so he suggests they round up the thieves while Selin keeps the boss busy. However, to his surprise, some of the thieves were out of the ice. Suddenly, Satane, one of the thieves, reached out and tried to grab Luke, but Barlat quickly snatched him and fended them off while holding Luke in his arms. While Luke screams out his lungs, some weapons-wielding villagers freeze watching the scene. So Satane orders the other thieves to fight the villagers since they don't know what to do with the weapons. However, when the thieves attack, Another villager blocks it with a shield, which breaks, while another villager instructs his comrades to follow the same tactics they practiced in training. Sensing the tension among the villagers, Satan decides to keep spreading the fear, but to his dismay, Barlat hits his face with Luke's boots, sending him back into the moat. Just then, Luke orders the villagers to push the thieves back into the moat because their frozen bodies are still slow. Suddenly, the villagers got into action and hurled the thieves back into the moat. Surprised, Satan wonders how they lost to some complete novices. To make matters worse, the boss's axe falls into the moat, so Satan looks up and watches his frozen boss fall back into the moat. Selen then mocks him for being all muscles and no brains since he didn't notice her taking his body heat away with every cut. The next day, other abducted people were saved after information was obtained from the thieves. Selen then thanks Nema for beating the information out of the thieves. In response, Nema asks Luke if he'd like to know her methods, but he refuses. After this, he visits the cells where the thieves are being held and they call him names. Meanwhile, Luke thought of handing them over to a nearby domain with proper laws, but considering the ongoing war, it wasn't a good idea, so Luke worried about what to do. Just then, he gets a pop-up asking if he'd like to turn the thieves into villagers, but Luke figures it'll be too risky. Suddenly, he remembers that he could build a rehabilitation center, so he checks it out and wonders if they could use it to reform the thieves. After thinking about this for a while, he decides to ask the villagers what they think. However, when he does, the villagers are surprised he's not putting them on the chopping block, so they suggest they get rid of the thieves. However, Donga suggests they try out the rehab center to see what it can do. Just then, some kid pointed out that his family had been slain by the criminals, and because of this, a few people left the village and the numbers went down. When Luke gets sad about this, Nema tells him it can't be helped when the people disagree with the direction of the village. She then predicts that one day the villagers will go wild when they forget what Luke did for them. Shocked, Barlat asks what she means, and Nema explains that it's human nature. In addition to this, she says with an evil grin that she enjoys dealing with such people and tells Luke to push forward. So, Luke heads to the cell and makes the thieves villagers, so the numbers go back up and the village levels up. Sometime later, Luke creates the rehabilitation center and has 5 obedient-looking thieves put in there first. He then puts Nema in charge of the rehabilitation, hoping that it will solve the problems with the thieves. However, the thieves shed crocodile tears to make Luke change his mind, but he refuses to give in to their puppy dog eyes and checks their village loyalty. When he discovers that they are still mutinous, he tells Nema to take them away and decides to upgrade the broken gate to keep it from breaking easily. Afterwards, Luke checks out the new skills he's unlocked and discovers a skill called Facility Customization, which enables him to remodel facilities by spending village points. So rearranges the village, and when it comes together pretty well, Luke ponders what to build next. Suddenly, Luke creates a public bath, and when the villagers ask him what it is, he explains that it's a place where everyone can take a bath. Afterwards, he tells them where the men and ladies are meant to go, and the villagers ask if they can start using it. A few moments later, Luke heads out to the field and finds Selen and Barlat sparring with wooden swords. On spotting Luke, Selen whacks Barlat in the face to impress him and breaks the wooden sword in the process. Seeing this, Gort, another villager, points out that it's the last one since they don't have any more swords or weapons. When he adds that they've been planning to explore farther to find better things for weapons, Luke asks if they have weapons for the exploration, and Selen points out that the thieves didn't have nice weapons on them, except the boss's axe, which no one could use. While they try to figure out a solution, Luke thinks about it too and realizes that all his gift lets him make our facilities. So, while he racks his brains for answers, Barlat tells him they've been to the forest plenty of times and advises him to use his gift for himself. In addition, Barlat points to Luke's matchbox house and says he should have built a bigger one before making a bath house. When Luke says it'd be a waste of points, Gort chips in that it must be inconvenient sleeping on a bed with 2 others. However, some other villagers show up and disagree with him. After thanking Luke for the bath, Lando tells them to think of the fun things that could go on when trying to share a toilet and bath with 2 baddies. Suddenly, everyone sees Luke in a different light, so he quickly upgrades the house to a medium-sized crib. Later, when he and the ladies check out the new house, The ladies sob while Luke smiles since they now have bigger beds. Unsatisfied, Milia says she'll sleep with Luke on his bed while Selen protests. So Luke suggests that they both share a bed while he sleeps on a single-size bed. Hearing this, the ladies break down, wailing, but Luke ignores them and wonders what to do next with his facility customization. He then heads to the stone wall and creates some stairs behind it to help their defense against attacks. While he makes holes in the stone wall to make embrasures, Donga shows up and asks what the space is for. In response, Luke says he figures they could strike back from the holes if they were ever under attack. Just then, Donga points out that it's too easy to reach the village from the outside, so Luke worries he might need to do something about the lack of weapons. Suddenly, he gets an idea and realizes that he could alter the part of a wooden house using facility customization. So he heads to the house and makes the wood longer. After this, he fabricates a wooden sword out of the wood and realizes it needs a few improvements. Just then, Luke discovers he couldn't customize the sword once it was detached from the building, so he tries again and completes the sword before detaching it. Seeing it worked and didn't cost many points, Luke tests his fabrication by swinging it around, but it snaps. So he realizes it's so fragile and decides to make it from a sturdier material. Shortly after, he arrives at the cell, and the inmates call him names while banging the bars. Meanwhile, Luke observes that the bar doesn't budge despite this, so he decides to fabricate his weapons from the bars. Suddenly, a new bar appears, scaring the inmates, who then wonder where the bar came from. So, Luke gets to work fabricating while the prisoners watch like cavemen at a mirror exhibition. After wondering what he'd use for the hilt, Luke decides to try out a bunch of combinations and leaves the cells as the gobsmacked inmates watch. A few moments later, Selen and Barlat watch in amazement as Luke shows them the swords and explains how he made them. So, Selen tosses one of the swords to Barlat, who then catches it, and they spar with the swords. After a few minutes of clashing swords, Selen comments that the swords are perfect and hurries off to inform the others about it. Just then, Nema shows up and presents the reformed inmates, surprising Luke, who then checks their village loyalty and realizes it's now high. While he cluelessly stares at the men standing before him, Nema tells the men to do whatever Luke tells them to, and when they respond, Luke thinks they look like different people. Suddenly, the men get on their knees and pledge their allegiance to him. Curious, Luke asks Nema what she did to turn them into dummies, and she reveals that her guidance came in handy. In addition to this, Nema states that the inmates became docile the moment they were put in the facility. As she turns to leave, Nema tells Luke to send her some men with guts next, while the men pester Luke for orders. But since Luke doesn't trust them yet, he wonders what to do with them, and when he spots Barlat training nearby, he asks them to go help him out. Afterwards, Nema continues with the rehab while the hunters keep an eye on the rehabilitated ones. One day, when Luke and Nema visit the cell to get more thieves rehabilitated, he suddenly hears a voice in his head. On looking around, he realizes it's one of the inmates communicating to him through telepathy. Just then, the Satan introduces himself and reveals that he's from a well-known merchant family who kicked him out when something went wrong. Because of this, he became a thief to survive. In addition to this, Satan says he never fully became a thief since he only had to do it to get by. Hearing this, Luke figures it must be why he has a gift since gifts are mostly restricted to nobles. But when Satan whines, begging to be released, Luke checks his loyalty and realizes he's still mutinous. Despite Satan's efforts to feign innocence, Luke insists he must be lying. So Satan tries to concentrate and read Luke's mind to find some info that'll point to his weak spot. But to his dismay, Milia rushes in to check on Luke, so he reads her mind instead. On discovering her thoughts, Satan freaks out and points out that Milia is a nasty woman. In response, Milia accuses him of being rude, but when Nema points out that Satan could read minds, Milia nominates him for rehabilitation. So Nema drags him along while he protests, saying Milia is more dangerous than he is. After they leave, Luke asks Milia what she was thinking, but she says it's nothing. Luke then points out that Satan looked really shocked, so Milia explains that it might be because she was thinking about cleaning the toilets later. On hearing this, Luke says that he must have been surprised because he has never seen the toilets. Afterwards, Luke realizes something feels off and approaches some villagers to ask them what was wrong. In response, they explain that Selen and the hunting team aren't back yet. Suddenly, a girl from the crowd says that it's the curse of Almiraj, confusing Luke, who then asks what she's talking about. The Almiraj is a frequently hunted giant, aggressive rabbit that grows large with a sharp horn. Since Luke is familiar with this, he wonders if it has any magical powers. Just then, the girl presents a couple of Almiraj balls to Luke, who then asks why she has them. In response, the girl explains that in the previous week, when the hunters came back with an Almiraj as usual, she looked at it and felt a shiver run down her spine. The Almiraj, which was supposed to be dead, then stared at the balls she held, so she checked them out. But to her surprise, the Almiraj lets out an awful screech and comes back to life. Hearing this, Barlet chips in that the Almiraj could have been unconscious and was awakened by the smell of the balls, but the girl freaks out and flings the balls at them while claiming the balls are cursed. After this, Barlet explains that the scent could be on the hunters too if they helped with the butchering of the meat. When he points out that the hunting team doesn't stand a chance against a pack of Almiraj, Luke suddenly feels a chill, so he announces that they need to go help. Just then, the watchman in the tower calls their attention to something outside the walls. On checking it out, Barlet states that they might also be in danger, but Luke comments that it's not a pack of Almiraj. While they stare at two large structures and wonder what it is, the girl presents the balls to them again. Just then, they realize an odd entity has come to the village, so Luke tells Barlet to get everyone to safety while he buys them some time. However, Gort suggests they throw the thieves at it and see if they've truly been reformed. Just then, Selen shows up and asks why everyone is in panic mode. Surprised, Barlet asks if she's okay and points out that they just saw a huge creature approaching the village. Just then, the entire hunting team arrives, and Selen explains that they hunted a couple of orcs. Since the orcs are ill-tempered creatures capable of laying waste to a village, their meat is rare and considered a luxury food item. When the orcs are laid down, the villagers touch their bodies and ask how long it'll take for them to get a taste of it. Just then, Milia announces that she'll start preparing it right away, so the cooking team gears up. After several hours of cooking, the food is served, and the villagers dig in. On the first bite, one of the villagers throws a tantrum while claiming it tastes so good, and before long, others taste it and overreact too. Shortly after, Luke spots the girl with the ball rumors and asks if she doesn't like meat, but she points out that she was wrong about the curse. Hearing this, Milia comments on the girl's love for balls and announces that her dish is ready. When Milia shows up with a dish of orcish balls, the girl freaks out and comments that they're huge. Milia then suggests she give them a try, and the other ladies show up, curious about it too. While the little girl feasts on the balls, Luke and Barlet watch, surprised. A few minutes later, another dish made from orc parts arrives, and the ladies devour the meat while the guys cringe. Some months later, Luke comments that it's getting chilly, and Barlet responds by saying they should get ready for winter. Just then, Barlet arrives with some guys and announces that they've been thinking of taking a trip home since they've been concerned about their parents. Hearing this, Luke suggests they bring them to the village since there's plenty of room, but Barlet says they won't fare well on the trip. When Selen offers to help, Barlet says he's worried about their parents too, and suggests they could be their guards. However, Selen states that the entire hunting team can't go, so she begs Luke to let them help. Suddenly, the reformed thieves show up asking to be used as shields or decoys. Despite this, Luke says he doesn't trust them enough to let them out yet, but Selen weighs in on their behalf and adds that she'll beat them up if they misbehave. Not long after this, they leave the village, and Luke waves them off at the gate while saying he doesn't trust the thieves. A few days later, Luke moves a few things around the village, and when he's done, the village looks perfect with 2 layers of stone walls and living space for the ex-convicts. Luke then explains to his companions that it would help the former thieves work the fields and defend the village. Seeing this, Satan and the other reformed thieves thank Luke for his kindness and request that he leave them to watch the wilds for any danger. In addition to this, Satan says he can always report to Luke with his telepathy if he finds anything. Impressed by this, the villagers comment on how cool his abilities are, and when someone asks how he ended up as a thief with such a gift, Satan narrates that his people didn't think his gift was handy since he gets to read minds. From the moment he received the gift, he heard the priest's thoughts and realized he's a nutjob with a cassock. With his gift, Satan discovered people are not who they pretend to be, including his parents, who secretly made plans to get rid of him. Because of this, he ran away and met the boss and his gang of thieves, who saw the value in his gift. In response, someone points out that his hard life doesn't give him the right to harm people, and Satan admits to knowing this. After this, Satan and his crew announce their departure, But when Milia suddenly walks in to announce the return of Burlet and the others, Satan accidentally reads her mind and gets knocked out by shock. After Barlet reunites with his father, Luke shows up and meets Barlet's father, who then thanks him for all he's done. At the same time, Nema's husband reunites with her, but she's not enthusiastic about the reunion. Just then, Luke spots some unfamiliar faces kneeling beside Selen, so he points out that their clothes look familiar. Selen then explains that they're leftover thieves from the gang who attacked them and got beaten. Just then, some of the reformed thieves tap their former comrades on the shoulder and tell them they'll see the light soon. Shocked, the thieves couldn't believe their ears, so the reformed thief explained that he had learned the value of living justly. Some miles away, Mac, a village chief from the south, and his son Manta wander in the wastelands looking for villages. But since they couldn't find any, Mac suggests they keep looking since there isn't enough food in their village to last them the winter. When Manta complains about the tiring journey, Mac tells him to quit whining and keep walking. In addition, Mac states that he can't believe they raised taxes for more war, but his son tells him that they won't find the Lord's son, since he was so young when they kicked him out. In response, Mac says that they can't sit around and wait for death, so Manta regrets his failure to chase his dreams of becoming an adventurer. However, his father gets furious and reminds him of how much of a letdown he has been as a son, and while he gives him the lecture of his life, Manta suddenly calls his attention to something up ahead. However, Mac stares into the distance but can't see anything, so Manta leaps forward and reveals that he saw a village. In the village, while the people reunite with their parents, Luke watches from a window and comments that everyone looks happy. Selen then states that they must be tired and suggests they all get some rest. Just then, Luke announces that he's off to bed and heads to his room. Not long after this, Selen and Milia appear in his room and creep into the bed with him. The next day, Luke gets a ping and is notified by Satan that two men are approaching the village, so Milia says they might be refugees. Shortly after this, Mac and Manta arrive, and when they introduce themselves, Luke reciprocates the gesture while wondering if they're from his family's domain. Just then, Mac asks if he's the son of Lord Albert, surprising Luke, who then asks if they know him. In response, Mac says he heard that the Lord ordered his son to cultivate a wasteland and points out that Luke must have been at it for a while. However, Luke says it's just been half a year. Since it sounds unbelievable, Mac and Manta doubt he's telling the truth. So Luke asks why they showed up, and Mac explains that they're looking for a place to earn some money since another war is coming. Hearing this, Luke welcomes them to the village and thinks about the war he mentioned. Since his family's domain and their neighboring domain were not on good terms, Luke wonders if Rael will be joining in the fight. When Mac thanks Luke for helping, he says it's fine and wonders what he would have done if he had received the holy swordsmanship. Luke then wonders if he would have noticed all the suffering around him since he was obsessed with living up to expectations back then. When Mac says they'll head back to Mao to tell everyone the good news, Luke says they're all welcome since there's enough food to feed everyone. Some days later, the villagers of Mao arrive in the village and are welcomed by Luke. On checking out the farms, the newbies express their surprise to see the crops growing in a wasteland and point out that the rumors about Luke getting a useless gift were untrue. In response, Luke says that he didn't get the holy swordsmanship, but he received the gift of village building, which he uses to build the village. Suddenly, the hunters return from their hunt, and Selen walks in carrying an almiraj on her shoulders. Shocked, the newbies freak out while Selen comments that they must be from Mao village and suggests they throw a feast since they're stocked up for winter. Seeing this, Luke realizes it's not a small feat but wonders why Selen is showing off. As if that's not enough, Selen calls everyone's attention to their big game. They had hunted a great boar, so the refugees couldn't believe it, while Luke asks how they took it down. In response, Selen explains that they took it down using the shield and swords he made for them. On checking the shield, Luke realizes it's dented despite its thickness. Meanwhile, Mac and Manta watch, wondering if they're dreaming while the beast gets dragged into the village walls. Afterwards, Luke tells the Mao villagers to relax, but Mac asks if they could put up their tents near the walls. Luke then tells them to give him a second to make something for them, so he swings his fingers and a house drops, leaving the refugees mind blown. When they ask where the house came from, Luke clears his throat and explains that he could make many things with his village-building gift. Still shocked, Mac states that the rumors said he got a useless gift, and Luke agrees with him since it's only useful in the wastelands. Afterwards, Luke gets notified that the village has exceeded 1,000 villagers and has leveled up. Seeing this, Luke freaks out and figures the influx of people into the village didn't stop after 92 people joined from Mao village. More refugees keep showing up at the gates, and Luke takes them in with open arms. Meanwhile, the rehabilitated thieves patrol the wastelands to ensure people can traverse safely. While talking to his girls and Burlet, Luke points out that the village has grown a bit since it keeps trending on every rumor platform. In addition, Selen says that the escalating war might make their village a target soon, and suggests they prepare as much as they can. Hearing this, Milia tells them to leave it to her and her oracle gift. Shortly after, at the church, the people were surprised when informed that some of them had gifts. So, an assessment was done, and Luke discovered that about 100 villagers have a potential gift. On hearing this, some of the villagers get overly excited and comment that they don't have to work anymore, but they get corrected by another villager, who then chips in that they need everyone's help to keep the village running. At the time, there weren't many kinds of jobs in the village, so the villagers were made to do similar jobs, which helped foster a sense of community. Despite all this, Luke remains concerned since the village loyalty of some individuals remains low, and they're more likely to leave the village. Just then, he spots some dude getting along with everyone, but he soon notices that he's a Casanova. Eventually, the ladies found out, and a quarrel ensued. To make matters worse, a woman shows up with her baby, claiming she's married to the dude, so Luke lets Nema handle the guy. Later, while strolling in the village, Luke spots a woman looking disturbed and asks if there's anything he can do to help. The woman then reveals that things are not going well with her neighbors. After he sorts this out, Luke lands in the fields exhausted, so he complains about a day being too short, and Barlat comments that things are taking shape. While he tries to fix things in the village, the villagers surpass the 1,000 mark, and Luke realizes he could build more facilities. On spotting an apartment complex, Luke remembers what they look like in his previous life, so he realizes it costs 300 points to build one. Suddenly, Luke builds the apartment building outside the walls of the village since the village area has increased. Later that day, Luke bumps into Nema and finds her looking exhausted, so he asks if something is wrong. In response, Nema reveals that the rehabilitation is going on well, but she adds that 2 of the thieves just won't break. One of them is Doriel, the boss of the thieves, who refused to break, regardless of the amount of pain Nema inflicted on him. Just then, Selen shows up and points out that it must be hard trying to get people to change. In response, Nema reveals that Bar is another inmate proving difficult to break. So they all visit the cell, and Bar asks Nema why she brought them. Annoyed by this, Nema hits his mouth, threatening to send him to an early grave, but to their surprise, Bar makes a weird sound. When Luke asks why he's making weird sounds, Bar reveals that he won't flinch from being abused by a biddy like Nema. Hearing this, Nema goes to work on him again, and while she whacks him all over, Bath makes happy noises, so Nema concludes he's a pain junkie. Surprised, Luke and Milia watch the dude enjoy himself after getting beaten while Nema explains that punishing Bar won't be effective. Selen then chips in that they could use pain as an incentive to control him, so she headbutts Bar and stomps him while telling him to cooperate if he wants his reward. However, Bar spits on her, making Selen freak out while he insists he can't be controlled. Suddenly, Nema whacks some sense into him. Seeing all this, Luke suggests they put his rehabilitation on hold. Meanwhile, Selen checks out Doriel's cell and finds him sitting quietly. Just then, Doriel identifies her as the Ice Blade Princess and asks what she's doing out in the wastelands. When Selen says that she has her reasons, Doriel admits that she beat him and reveals that he has no intention of following someone weaker than him. Selen then asks if he's asking to be released because he'll be on his best behavior, but Dorian says he only wants to show respect to the person who bested him, and reveals that if she ever needs his strength, he'll answer her call. Afterwards, when Selen tells the others about it, she explains that Doriel was a tough opponent to fight, and adds that he might be a strong asset if he's on their side. However, he says she doesn't trust him yet, and suggests they keep him as a last resort in case something happens. Later, many people use the public bath, and on seeing this, Milia points out that everyone is craving a warm bath since it's getting chilly. Meanwhile, Luke feels glad to know everyone enjoys the bath, so he thinks of making other types of baths. Suddenly, he gets an idea and wonders if he can make a perfect bath for winter using his facility customization skill. So Luke upgrades his medium house to large and realizes it comes with an outdoor bath. On seeing this, the villagers freaked out and wouldn't stop admiring the building. Although Luke wasn't expecting it to be very big, he smiles, knowing it can accommodate more people, so he tells the villagers to visit anytime. When he checks out the bath, Luke figures it'd be embarrassing to take a bath outdoors and suddenly overhears some villagers commenting on the bath, which looks like a pond. Suddenly, he pushes the guys into the pool and tells them to say less and get in. While the guys soak in the bath, Luke turns to leave, so one of the guys asks if he won't be joining them, but Luke tells them not to worry about him and leaves. Later, after everyone had left, Luke sneaks to the bath to get some personal time and hops in the bath. While he enjoys himself, Milia suddenly rises out of the water behind him and pulls a sneaky attack on him. After thinking of how much time has passed since she arrived in the wastelands with Luke, Milia sees everyone else as meddlers and realizes she's been spending more time attending to refugees and less time with Luke. So she gets furious and decides to do something about it. After giving it some thought, Milia figures she must offer him her touch to fill the lonely void in his heart. So while she rubs Luke's back in the bath, Milia convinces herself that she's doing it for Luke. Suddenly, Selen shows up and violently splits them apart. When she accuses Milia of being sneaky, Milia says she's just there to help Luke unwind. However, since Selen doesn't believe her, she tries to drag Milia out of the bath, and a squabble ensues and Luke tries to stop them. When they didn't listen to him, Luke screamed and told them to quit fooling around in the bath, shocking the ladies. Meanwhile, in the northern region of Albert's domain, a knight informs Dantho, the governor, that people from another village have completely vanished. Surprised that it's happening again, Dantho says he expected a few to leave because of the increased taxes, but expresses his surprise to hear the news. When he insinuates that there's only hardship awaiting them outside the region, the knight informs him about a bizarre rumor going around. Curious, Dantho asks about it, and the knight reveals that there's a village in the northern wastelands which promises its people safety, comfort, and plenty to eat. Hearing this, Dantho points out that it's an obvious trap since the wastelands aren't remotely livable. However, when he thinks about it, Dantho realizes why the idea might be appealing to the people, so he orders the knight to look into it while offering to go with him if need be. Sometime later, Luke gets notified that a suspicious group was observing the village, so he asks if they're more migrants, but Satan reveals that they're possibly scouts. Just then, Selen asks Luke if something is wrong, and he reveals the situation. Hearing this, someone asks if they're foes, while another suggests they get ready. However, Luke says, since they've all gotten stronger, they won't let the intruders start a fight with them easily. A few days later, the knight and Dantho arrive at the gates of the village and are shocked at the sophisticated build. When the knight asks how such a settlement was built in no time, Dantho comments that the village can easily be called a city. The guards then ask what business they have with the village, so Dantho introduces himself and requests to speak to the village head. Suddenly, the gates were rolled up, and they were invited in. Seeing how easy that was, Dantho figures it must be a trap, but his knight assures him that he's safe. On entering the village, Dantho couldn't believe it when he saw the produce of their crops, and marveled when he spotted wheat growing out of season. While he racks his brains, wondering how it's possible to have all that, Dantho realizes the rumors were true. A few moments later, Dantho meets with Luke, who then introduces himself. On seeing him, Dantho became sure he was the boy he had once met long ago at the capital. While he stands before the skeleton of the great boar, Dantho bows to pay his respects, while his knights freak out at the sight of the skeleton. While the knights wonder if the villagers picked the bones somewhere, someone screams about how delicious the hunted great boar tastes. Impressed by their feat, the hunting team beamed with smiles while watching their guests' reaction. At the same time, Luke and the governor stare at each other in an awkward silence. In Albert's domains, there are over 20 governors who rule over lands taken through war. Dantho is one of those who were allowed to keep serving because he pledged his allegiance to Albert's domain. Just then, Dantho apologizes for his belated greetings, but says he doesn't need to. After wondering if Dantho knows that he was banished to the wastelands, Luke figures they might be interacting in the future, since Dantho's region is close by. So, Luke announces that they've prepared a feast in his honor and suggests they enjoy their time in the village. As they strolled along the streets, Dantho spotted the apartment building and asked what it was. In response, Luke explains that it's where the villagers live. After this, Dantho points out that it's very clean in the village, and Luke explains that they do their best to keep it clean and hygienic. Shortly after, Dantho spots the bathhouse and asks what it is. In response, Luke explains that although each household has their baths, most of the villagers like to take a dip in the spacious bathhouse. Curious, Dantho asks Luke how he managed to build so much in such little time, and he reveals that he built the village with his village-building gift. When Dantho wonders what that is and states that it must be why he was sent to the Wastelands, Luke reveals that he only became aware of his ability after he was sent to the Wastelands. In addition to this, Luke reveals that his father doesn't know about the gift's true power. On hearing this, Dantho says he understands, and some moments later, while they feast, he adds that he never expected such a grand welcome for a surprise visit. Afterwards, Milia announces that they'll be having some swordsmanship for entertainment, so the hunting team steps out while Dantho asks if they're the ones who hunted the great boar. When Luke confirms this, the performance begins with the hunters clashing swords, and he crowd cheering for them. Suddenly, a lady with magical gifts showed off her abilities while Luke worried, since he didn't want to bring up anything related to the church. Meanwhile, Dantho and his knights were shocked to see they had people with magic too. Afterwards, Luke shows his guests to their residence, and Dantho thanks him for the hospitality. Later, when Dantho asks his knight what he makes of the village, the knight reveals that it's odd and apologizes for assuming they could protect the governor if there was any danger. In addition to this, the knight explains that they wouldn't stand a chance against the villagers if things had gone wrong. Just then, Dantho reveals that he saw a church and wonders how Luke got the villagers to receive the blessing without a priest, since all priests are under the control of the church. Dantho then insinuates that the numbers don't add up and chips in that the church might take action if they find out. When his knight asks how he intends to explain his discoveries to the Lord of the Domain, Dantho says he won't, since the Lord's view of Luke will improve and threaten Rael's position as next in line for the Domain. After this, Dantho states that he has always done as he's told and has turned a blind eye to his people's suffering. So he wonders if there's another way. Meanwhile, Satan eavesdrops on the conversation and relates it to Luke, who then expresses his relief while Selin comments that the governor might not step out of the Wastelands again. The next day, Luke meets with the governor, and after they exchange pleasantries, Dantho thanks Luke for accepting the migrants from his domain while explaining that his citizens have suffered from his inactions. Dantho then asks Luke if he minds selling some food to them in exchange for supplies, since they're broke. Luke then says that they still lack a few things as a new village and takes the offer. After they shake hands, Dantho promises to dispatch some of his best men from the Merchants Guild. As they head out of the village, Luke realizes he should create a road where carriages can pass when the merchants arrive, so he quickly makes a paved road. Some days later, while Luke and the others work on the farms, someone announces that the hunter has returned. But when he sees only Barlet and a few others, he asks about Selin, and Barlet reveals that she's still in the forest. In addition to this, he explains that they encountered some injured elves and escorted them back to their village. Upon hearing this, some idiot reveals that he heard elven women are stunning and wonders if they'd pay them back in kind for the favor. However, he gets smacked by Barlet, who reveals that elves avoid humans because they've been abused for their beauty before. So Luke asks for details about what happened, and Barlet narrates how they were hunting as usual and heard someone yelling inside the forest. When they checked it out, they found the elves fighting for their lives against mad grizzlies. However, since many of the elves were injured, they decided to join the fight and escort them back to their village. Just then, some elves arrive and identify Luke, who was pretty gobsmacked to see them. While the boys whisper about their looks, Philia reveals she came in place of the tribe's chief to express their gratitude. After she introduces herself, Selin tells the guys to quit starring and apologizes to Philia, who then says it's fine. Afterwards, Philia says that she can't believe there's a village in the wasteland since she thought nothing could grow there. Luke then decides to show them around, but some fun-starved dude suggests he show them to the bath first. Suddenly, everyone scolds him for thinking with his magnum. However, since Philia stinks, Selin suggests they visit the bath first and tells Philia that humans take dips in cool water during summer. When they arrive at the public bath, Philia takes off her gear while her comrades point out that they're letting down their guard. However, Philia says they would have been dead if the humans wanted to harm them. A few moments later, Luke shows Philia where the men's bath is and adds that Selin will show her where the women's bath is. Suddenly, Philia slips out of her clothes while Milia covers Luke's eyes. Selin then tells her there's a room for changing, but Philia doesn't care, so she asks what's next and heads into the men's bath, where Donga is chilling. On spotting her, Donga screams and throws things at her while calling her names. Drawn by the commotion, other guys rush in and find Philia with her assets on display. When Selin tries to get the guys out, they insist they're in the men's bath. Just then, a male elf tries to get in the bath with Donga but gets told to wash himself first. At that moment, Nema walks in and asks if she should give the offenders a good spanking, but Luke refuses since they're guests. Meanwhile, Philia wonders why there's so much drama over a bath, so Selen suggests she get dressed. Later at Luke's house, Philia enjoys her bath in the outdoor bath and comments on how intriguing it feels. While Luke feels good about the elves who enjoyed the bath, some of them walk by without clothes, and Milia saves Luke from being brain-fried by the sight. Who do you think is hotter between Milia and Philia? Let us know in the comments below. Also, if you like more awesome videos like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.